Peace, peace. This is your host, Selah-Shalom. And this is the Cosmon Teachings in the words of Jehovah and his angel ambassadors from the Cosmon Bible, OAHSPE. And the topic of discussion today is called oral tradition. Now, oral tradition is the oldest tradition of learning on the planet. It predates writing systems. And one of the oldest oral traditions found on the planet can be found among the original people of Australia.
We are the original inhabitants of this land called Australia by the white men. We have been here since the beginning of time, since the dream time, when everything we know was created. Our people, our culture, are the oldest in the world. We were already here thousands of years ago. We were around at the same time as what the white men called Homo sapiens. Across all our territory, you can find paintings made by our forefathers in which speak of the dream time, the creation, and how they lived 50,000 years ago.
So here you can see that it states that they have a lineage of 50,000 years of oral tradition. The people of Australia maintained oral tradition. Most oral traditions are learnt from a child to an adult, because the child will be taught by the elders in the village about the history of their people.
We elders have the important task of initiating the young into our customs, explaining our history to them, and teaching them to respect the traditional laws.
So this is how the history is preserved, by memorizing mouth to ear what the elder of the community is saying. Most oral traditions are revealed by angels. And once the angel reveals it to the priest will reveal it to the community, or those in charge of memorizing what the priest say, the scribe. But these scribes wasn't writing down nothing, they was memorizing it.
In these caves and caverns, we can feel the influence of the spirits of our ancestors. If you sleep here, you can see them in your dreams and receive their messages. They come and fill you with their strength, and when you wake, you feel very good.
So the oral tradition is the oldest learning system on the planet. It predates the writing system. That came afterward. Even when you're coming up as a child, you learn orally before you start writing. Now, as you notice, even the Australians admit communicating with the spirits to receive information. Just as I showed on the last video, spiritual system of communication. So for those who may think I'm just making this up out of thin air, I'm showing you references to prove historically what I'm saying. Because a lot of people want physical evidence and facts. Not everything is going to come in that manner. Not all truth comes by what you see. Some things and some truth are carried down orally. Now when we look at the Dogon tribe.
Now we must ask, how did a primitive people, lacking instruments of any kind, discover a dark star hidden deep in space?
They fall under the same category of this oral tradition and spiritual system of communication.
The Hogon, the high priest of Eru, is the chief of Dogon religious knowledge. Selected more than 30 years ago by signs and prophecies, he lives a prisoner in a small temple compound. The Hogon is adored and provided for by his people, but cannot be touched by man or woman. He is the living repository of all that is known. His isolation from worldly needs and worldly concerns ensures that the sacred knowledge he keeps will remain pure.
Even language came about by the angels through spirit communion.
Away from the clamor of village life, in caves and rock shelters, the teachings of the Hogon are renewed. Tribal legend tells us that beings called Numo descended from the sacred star and appeared before the Dogon ancestors. The Dogon were entrusted by the Numo with 366 symbols given without meaning. The dogon were charged with interpreting them and preserving the information for future generations. The symbols reveal an astonishing scope of astronomical knowledge, an infinite number of stars and spiraling worlds.
And this validates what the OAHSPE says about the earliest mortal language. Because according to OAHSPE, the first mortal language was revealed through the angels, where the Lord came down and wrote the characters and glyphs and interpreted the glyphs for the mortals. And the mortals memorized the glyphs, understood the glyphs, and those became the early oral systems of tradition. Now the same statement you hear about the dogons being contacted by a being and revealing to the dogons glyphs, which later became symbols to interpret as a language. Now, in OAHSPE, the first book of the First Lords, chapter 4, verse 1 through 4, it states, "About this time man began to use his lips and tongue in enunciating words, prior to which he spoke in the thorax." Verse 2, "And the Lord spoke unto the Ions, the sacred little people, saying, that the labor of the Lord thy God may be remembered on earth, go provide me a stone, and I will engrave it with my own hand, and it shall be called Simoan, because it shall be a testimony unto all nations and peoples on the earth of the first written language in all the world." Verse 3, "And the Ions prepared a stone, and hewed it flat, and then polished it smooth. And the Lord came down in the night and engraved it. And the Lord explained it. Through his angels taught he the Ions, the sacred little people, the meaning of the characters engraved thereon." Verse 4, "And the Lord said, go into all cities and all countries of the world, and provide ye copies like unto the tablets I have given. So it came to pass the angels of heaven inspired the Ions, the sacred little people, to make tablets and to read them, that the first language of the earth might be preserved to the races of men." And it was so. So here you have it. In the OAHSPE it says the first written language was revealed by the angels, the same way that the dogon was revealed their signs and symbols.
Tribal legend tells us that beings called Numo descended from the sacred star and appeared before the Dogon ancestors. The Dogon were entrusted by the Numo with 366 symbols given without meaning. The Dogon were charged with interpreting them and preserving the information for future generations.
So I'm showing you correlations of oral tradition coming from the spirit world to mortals and then generations down being carried out. And with that being said, the hieroglyphs could have came about in the same manner, because nobody can decipher or understand the hieroglyphs, nor do we know the root, the origin of the hieroglyphs. But now that we have confirmation coming from the Dogons about how a being revealed certain glyphs to them, and it was up to them to decipher it, and then reading from the OAHSPE showing you how the angels revealed the first mortal language, shows you that these things could have came about through spirituality.
If you brought together all these songs which are passed down from generation to generation, and which come from dreams, we would compose the map of Australia. The men who know how to play it are very important in our culture. With the didgeridoo, they communicate our wishes to the spirits, and they call on them to come to our aid when tragedy befalls us. This sacred instrument brings us closer to the world of our ancestors. It awakens the rainbow serpent without making it angry, and allows us to speak with the God of creation.
So the oral tradition is one of the oldest traditions. And most of the times when they begin to write these records down is when they feel that their knowledge is going to be lost because of coming invasions that they may feel. Because a lot of them get prophecies about things to come. Just like when the Europeans came to the Native Indians didn't have too much documents to write about the Spaniards invading. All their traditions was orally. So once they got wiped out, their history got wiped out. The only reason we have records of the Native Indians is because of the Spaniards who documented and wrote the event. But coming from the natives themselves, we don't have the records. See that? Because they carry the oral tradition.
Bartolomé de las Casas kept a diary when Hernando de Soto's expedition passed through the southeast in 1539.
The Christians, with their horses, swords, and spikes, began to carry out massacres and strange cruelties against the Indians. They attacked towns and spared neither children, the aged, nor pregnant women. The people were fed to dogs, skewered, and burned alive. All this did my own eyes witness. The cries of so much spilled blood reached all the way to heaven.
And with that, I'd like to say peace and blessings. Shalom.